There is something strange about the history of the werewolves, something that defies logic and intrigues even the most skeptical scholars. Because if you open the historical archives of virtually any ancient civilization, from any continent, from any period, you will always find the same story. Men who transform into beasts, creatures who walk between two worlds, predators who were human during the day and monsters during the night. In medieval France, they were called loup. In Germany, werewolf. In the Bohemia region, in southern France, especially in the Périgord region, the name was loup. But no matter the language, no matter the geographical distance, the essence remained the same. The transformation, the moon, the curse, the blood. And if you imagine that this belief was exclusive to Christian Europe, you are mistaken. Because when European explorers arrived in India in the 16th century, they found exactly the same stories. When Catholic missionaries landed in Central America, Aztec priests spoke of men who transformed into jaguars. When travelers crossed Armenia, they heard reports of women who wore wolf skins and devoured children. How is it possible that cultures so distant, which never had contact with each other, developed exactly the same myth? The official answer has always been simple: coincidence. Universal archetypes, the human mind projecting its fears onto natural predators. But when you begin to study the details, when you compare the rituals, when you analyze the descriptions, you realize that something deeper is happening. Because these stories are not just similar, they are almost identical. And perhaps the right question is not why all cultures created the werewolf myth. Perhaps the right question is, what if it is not a myth? In southern France, in the middle of the 19th century, peasants still believed, still feared, still hid when the full moon appeared on the horizon. Because for them, the loup-garou was not an ancient story. It was a present reality. Folkloric records collected by French certain men, especially those born outside of marriage, the so-called bastards, were destined from birth to transform into werewolves at each full moon. It was not a choice. It was destiny. That transformation followed a specific ritual. At nightfall, when the first ray of moonlight touched the earth, these men felt an uncontrollable desire to run. They left their beds, jumped through windows, and ran until they found a fountain or a lake. There, they plunged completely into the water, and when they emerged, they were no longer human. Their bodies were covered with dense, dark fur, their hands and feet transformed into paws, their faces elongated, forming snouts full of sharp fangs. And then the hunt began. They traversed fields and meadows, crossed forests and villages, attacking flocks and any human being who crossed their path. At dawn, the ritual reversed. The werewolves returned to the same fountain where they had plunged, entered the water again, and recovered their human forms. Then they returned to their beds, exhausted, covered with scratches and bites from dogs that tried to defend themselves during the night. And often they remembered nothing. But there was an even more disturbing variation of this legend. In some regions, the loup-garou did not appear as a common wolf. It appeared as a ghostly white dog, loaded with chains that dragged along the ground, producing a metallic and frightening sound. Some scholars believe there was confusion between two different legends, that of the werewolf and that of the black spectral dog that haunted cemeteries. But French peasants did not make this distinction. For them, all these creatures were part of the same dark world. And, most importantly, they knew how to protect themselves. The belief in transformation through an animal skin was not exclusive to France. In fact, This may be the oldest and most widespread version of the werewolf myth throughout the world, and there is a document that proves this in a fascinating way. In the year 1024, Bishop Burchard of Worms in Germany wrote a treatise on the superstitions that still persisted among newly converted Christians. And among these superstitions, he specifically mentioned the belief in werewolf, the wolfman. The bishop was furious because even after centuries of Christianization, Germanic peasants still believed that certain men could wear wolf skins and completely transform. Burchard described the belief in detail. According to Germanic folklore, there were mystical women called Parsi who decided the fate of each child at the moment of birth, and some of these children were marked to become werewolves. When they grew up, they would have the power to transform whenever they wished, simply by wearing a magical wolf skin. Saint Boniface, another important Christian missionary, preached against this same superstition decades earlier, calling it fictos lupos, fictitious wolves. But his preaching had no effect. The people continued believing, and there is a reason for this. Because the story of the magical skin was not just a Germanic belief. In Armenia, exactly the same legend existed. A man saw a wolf carry away a child. He pursued the creature to a cave, and there found a wolf skin thrown on the ground. He took the skin and threw it into the fire. Immediately, a woman appeared, howling desperately, trying to rescue the skin from the flames. But it was too late. When the skin was completely consumed, the woman disappeared in the smoke. In Slovakia, there was a folk tale about a father who had 9 daughters. He was a velkolik, a werewolf. He transformed regularly and attacked travelers on the roads, but he kept his wolf skin hidden at home. One day, the youngest daughter discovered the secret and burned the skin. The father was never able to transform again. Among the North American Indians, on the shores of the Great Bear Lake, there was a practically identical story. An Indian lived alone with a pregnant female dog. The dog gave birth to 8 puppies. Whenever the Indian went out to fish, he tied up the puppies so they would not escape. But one day, as he approached his tent, he heard voices of children laughing and playing. He entered the tent and saw only the puppies tied up. He decided to spy. He pretended to leave to fish, but hid nearby. Then he saw the puppies removed their dog skins and transformed into beautiful children. The Indian ran, grabbed the skins, and threw them into the fire. The children could never return to animal form and became the ancestors of the Dogrib nation, Germany, Armenia, Slovakia, North America, cultures separated by oceans and millennia, and all telling exactly the same story. How is this possible? When Europeans first arrived in India, they expected to find a completely different world. And, indeed, they did. But there was something familiar, something disturbingly recognizable. Indians also knew shape. In ancient India, the belief in transformation was even deeper than in Europe because it was directly connected to the doctrine of metempsychosis, the transmigration of souls. Hindus and Buddhists believed that the soul could reincarnate in different bodies, including animal bodies. And if the soul could transmigrate after death, why could it not do the same during life? In the Panchatantra, a collection of ancient Indian fables, there is the story of a Brahmin's son who was cursed. During the day, he was a serpent. During the night, he recovered his human form. Vikramaditya, a legendary Indian emperor, had a father who suffered the opposite curse. He was a donkey during the day and a man during the night. But the most revealing story is that of the prince and the female ape. A prince married a female ape, while his brothers married beautiful and human princesses. During a royal banquet, an extraordinarily beautiful woman appeared, dressed in magnificent clothes. It was the ape. She had removed her animal skin and assumed her true form. The prince, realizing what had happened, discreetly left the room, found the ape skin, and burned it. His wife could never return to an animal form. Exactly the same narrative structure as European legends. The magical skin, the transformation, the burning of the skin as a way to break the curse. But there was a crucial difference. In India, these metamorphic creatures were not necessarily seen as evil. They were often considered superior spiritual beings, souls that had transcended the limitations of physical form, until Christianity arrived, and everything changed. Because when Christian missionaries saw these stories, they immediately reinterpreted them. If a being could change form without God's permission, then it could only be the work of the devil. Hindu gods were declared demons. Magical transformations were labeled as witchcraft, and those who claimed to have these powers were persecuted. The same thing was happening in Europe. The same thing was happening in America. The same pattern repeating everywhere medieval Christianity arrived. But the question remains, if all these cultures independently created the same legends before having any contact with each other, perhaps there is something more than simple coincidence. In the year 1702, the Bishop of Chiapas, a province in Guatemala, published an alarming document. He had discovered that native priests, called Naguals, were practicing forbidden rituals to reverse the Christian conversion of indigenous children. The ritual was terrifying. Children who had been baptized and educated as Christians were taken to secret ceremonies in the forests. There, the Naguals performed their ancestral practices, teaching the young about the ancient gods and transformation powers. And at the crucial moment, when the child advanced to embrace the priest, something impossible happened. The Nagual transformed, his face contorted, his limbs elongated, and before the terrified eyes of the child, the priest assumed the form of a lion or a tiger. The animal seemed chained, bound by invisible chains to the young Christian, as if the child's own Christian faith kept him imprisoned. The bishop interpreted this as a demonic manifestation, an illusion created by the devil to drive children away from the true faith. But the Naguals saw it differently. For them, it was not illusion. It was real power, the power of their ancestors, the power that existed before the Europeans arrived with their crosses and their swords. And this was not the only transformation story in pre-Columbian America. Joseph Acosta, in his Natural History of the Indies, recorded an even more disturbing event. The ruler of a city in Mexico was summoned by Montezuma's predecessor. Soldiers were sent to arrest him, but when they arrived at his house, they witnessed something that left them paralyzed with terror. Before their eyes, the ruler transformed first into an eagle, then into a tiger, and finally into an enormous serpent. The soldiers retreated. But eventually, the ruler surrendered, because outside his own house, outside his sacred territory, his powers did not work. He was captured, tried, and executed, and his powers died with him. Or did they? Because decades later, when the Spanish had already conquered the entire Aztec Empire, reports of transformation did not cease. They continued happening. They continued being recorded. They continued haunting both colonizers and natives. And the question that no one wanted to ask was too obvious to be ignored. If all this was just superstition, just tricks, or collective hallucinations, why did cultures so distant, which never communicated, describe exactly the same phenomena? The answer was about to become even more complex, because there was a place where transformation was not legend. It was science. It was medicine. It was psychology. And European doctors were about to discover something that would change everything. Between 1810 and 1819, a man named Nathaniel Pierce lived in Abyssinia. He was not a missionary or a merchant. He was just a curious traveler, recording everything he saw. And what he saw disturbed him for years. In Abyssinia, goldsmiths and silversmiths were respected. They were considered noble craftsmen, men of talent and prestige. But there was a class of workers that everyone feared, the blacksmiths, men who worked with iron, forging tools and weapons. They were seen as inferior beings, outcasts, and they had a name. Buddha Pierce documented precisely what Abyssinians believed about these men. They possessed the power to transform into hyenas or other savage beasts. All cases of convulsions, hysterical disorders, and unexplained illnesses were attributed to their evil eye. There were Buddhas among Muslims, among Jews, among all religions, and all were feared. The Buddhas could be identified by a specific detail. They wore gold earrings, always. And here is the part that intrigued Pierce and all who heard his account. Abyssinian hunters frequently found dead hyenas in the forests, and when they examined the bodies of these animals, they found gold earrings in their ears. Pierce recorded that a man named Coffin, who lived 4 years in the region, claimed to have himself shot and speared several hyenas that wore these earrings. How did the earrings get into the hyenas' ears? No one could explain. But there was something even more disturbing. Abyssinians believed that the Buddhas desecrated graves at midnight. They stole bodies, and no one would ever touch the dried meat stored in their houses, although they would accept eating fresh meat if they saw the animal being killed in front of them, because there was always the suspicion that that dried meat was not from an animal. It was human. Pierce recorded a story he witnessed personally. One of his servants was a Buddha. One afternoon, still in daylight, the young man asked permission to be absent until the following morning. Pierce granted it. The young man departed. Pierce had barely turned his head when one of the other servants shouted, "Look, he is transforming into a hyena," and pointed in the direction the Buddha had taken. Pierce looked. The young man had disappeared. There were no trees or bushes where he could hide. The plain was completely open, and in the place where the young man stood, less than 100 paces away, there was a hyena running. The next morning, the young man returned. His companions accused him of the transformation. He did not exactly deny it. He simply apologized, saying it was the custom of his class. This account by Pierce was confirmed by Sir Gardner Wilkinson, a respected British historian, in a note he contributed to Rawlinson's work on Herodotus. Wilkinson wrote, "A class of people in Abyssinia are believed to change themselves into hyenas when they like." On my appearing to discredit it, I was told by one who lived 4 years there that no well-informed person doubted it, and that he was once walking with one of them when he happened to look away for a moment, and on turning again towards his companion, he saw him trotting off in the shape of a hyena. He met him afterwards in his old form. These worthies are blacksmiths. 2 independent testimonies. 2 educated and respectable men, both claiming to have witnessed transformations. How is this possible? There is something that connects all these stories, a pattern that repeats regardless of geography or era. And when you begin to map this pattern, you realize it is frighteningly consistent. First, there is always an object or ritual of transformation. In Europe, it is the wolf skin. In India, it is the ape skin. In America, they are dog skins. In Scandinavia, they are bird skins or magical garments. The method changes, but the structure remains identical. The human body is seen as a garment, and that garment can be changed. Second, transformation always involves water or fire. French werewolves plunge into fountains to transform and return to the same water to recover human form. Magical skins, when burned, permanently break the curse. Water and fire, purification and destruction. The two primordial elements that all ancient cultures revered. Third, there is always a physical mark. Abyssinian blacksmiths wear gold earrings that remain in their animal forms. European werewolves maintain scars received while they were wolves when they returned to human form. Jean Grenier, the French wolf boy, was instructed by the lord of the forest never to bite the thumbnail of his left hand while transformed, because that nail was longer and thicker than the others, a bridge between his two natures. And fourth, most importantly, there is always a specific social class associated with transformation. In Abyssinia, it is the blacksmiths. In medieval Europe, they were often shepherds or rural workers. In India, they were cursed Brahmins. In America, they were ancestral priests. Always the marginalized, always those who lived on the edges of society. Why? The answer may lie in the very nature of these professions. Blacksmiths worked with fire and metal, transforming raw matter into tools. Shepherds lived alone in forests, far from villages, in constant contact with predators. Ancestral priests were the guardians of pre-Christian knowledge, considered dangerous by the church. They all occupied liminal positions. They all transited between two worlds, and perhaps that is exactly why they were feared, because they represented something that civilized society wanted to forget. The wild part of human nature, the part that cannot be completely domesticated, the part that still remembers when our ancestors hunted in forests and competed with wolves for the same prey. Anthropologists call this liminal consciousness, the psychological state of being between two worlds, neither completely civilized nor completely wild. And in all ancient cultures, those who inhabited this liminal space were viewed with a mixture of fear and reverence, because they possessed power, the power to cross boundaries that others could not. But something deeper was happening, something that not even anthropologists could fully explain. At the heart of all these legends is a profound philosophical idea, the idea that the body is not the true self. It is just a garment, a temporary prison for the soul. This belief is not exclusive to any culture. Buddhists call it the doctrine of transmigration. Hindus speak of reincarnation. Gnostic Christians viewed the material body as a trap from which the soul needed to escape. And even in pre-Christian European folklore, there was this same perception. In ancient Germanic languages, the word for dead body reveals this understanding. In Old Norse, in Saxon, lihamo, in Old High German, lekamo. All these words literally mean flesh garment. The body was not you. It was just the clothing your soul wore temporarily. And if the body is just a garment, then it is logical that it can be changed. When Norse gods wanted to transform, they simply wore another skin. Loki, the god of trickery, borrowed from Freya. Her falcon dress and immediately became a falcon. For all intents and purposes, Thyesse pursued him after donning an eagle dress, becoming an eagle. It was not metaphor. It was not symbolism. For those people, it was literal reality. Physical form was malleable. The soul was what mattered, and the soul could inhabit different bodies. But when Christianity spread through Europe, this worldview came into direct conflict with Christian theology, because Christianity teaches that body and soul are inseparable, that God created each person with a specific, unique, and sacred body, that the final resurrection will be bodily, not just spiritual. So what was previously seen as divine power came to be interpreted as demonic witchcraft. Pagan gods were declared demons. Transformations were attributed to pacts with the devil, and those who claimed to have these powers were persecuted. Saint Boniface preached against those who believed in fictitious wolves. Bishop Burchard of Worms wrote Treatise denouncing the superstition of werewolf. The church waged a centuries-long war against these beliefs, but it could not eradicate them, because they were rooted too deeply in human consciousness. And there was a reason for this, a reason that went beyond theology or anthropology, a reason that modern science was about to discover. What makes the Abyssinia case so disturbing is not just the accounts. It is the physical evidence. Dead hyenas with gold earrings in their ears. How do you explain this without accepting that transformation really happened? Sir Gardner Wilkinson tried to maintain a skeptical stance, but even he admitted that no well-informed person doubted the veracity of transformations in Abyssinia, and he was one of the leading historians of his time. He was not a naive, superstitious person. He was a respected academic. Nathaniel also struggled with this contradiction. He saw the young Buddha disappear and a hyena appear in his place. There was nowhere to hide. The plain was completely open. And the next morning, when accused, the young man did not deny it. He simply said it was the custom of his class. How do you investigate something like this? How do you scientifically prove or refute a phenomenon that defies all known laws of biology? The answer that 19th century science found was brilliant in its simplicity. They changed the question. Instead of asking, do people really transform into animals? They began asking, why do people believe they transform into animals? And that is when everything changed. European doctors began documenting cases of patients suffering from a specific condition. They sincerely believed they were transforming into animals. They felt their bodies change. They saw fur grow on their skin. They experienced uncontrollable desires to hunt and devour raw meat. And some of them committed terrible acts. While in that state, the condition received a name: clinical lycanthropy, a form of insanity characterized by the delusional belief of animal transformation. But here is the problem. This explanation solves some cases, but not all, because clinical lycanthropy explains why someone believes they transformed. It does not explain why witnesses saw the transformation happen. It does not explain the gold earrings in the hyena's ears. It does not explain how Jean Grenier could accurately describe the wounds he caused in children he had never seen before in human form. Something else was happening, something that psychiatry alone could not explain. The truth about werewolves is not in a single explanation. It is at the intersection of several. First, there were real cases of psychosis. People who suffered from hallucinations induced by drugs, mental illnesses, or severe trauma. The ointments that supposedly caused transformation contained powerful narcotics: belladonna, aconite, henbane, opium. When applied to the skin, these compounds induced vivid hallucinations. the person truly believed they were transforming, and in their altered state, they committed acts they would normally never commit. Second, there is the power of collective suggestion. When an entire community believes in werewolves, when children grow up hearing these stories, when every shadow in the forest might be a metamorphic predator, the human mind fills in the gaps. It sees what it expects to see. It interprets ambiguous events through the lens of cultural belief. Third, there were real human predators, murderers, cannibals, sociopaths who found in the werewolf legend an identity, a power, a justification. They did not literally transform, but they assumed the personality of the wolf. They hunted like wolves. They killed like wolves. And when captured, many sincerely confessed to believing they were wolves. And fourth, there was the inexplicable, the cases that do not fit perfectly into any category, the impossible coincidences, the physical objects that should not be there, the multiple and independent witnesses, the details that defy rational explanation. Perhaps the right question is not whether werewolves exist. Perhaps the right question is, what do these myths reveal about human nature, about our fear of the wild that still dwells within us, about our need to create rigid categories between human and animal when the truth has always been much more fluid? Because in the end, we are all shapeshifters. We change our faces depending on where we are. We wear social masks. We repress instincts. We civilize our animal nature, but it never completely disappears. It just hides waiting, like a wolf in the darkness of the forest. And perhaps that is why the werewolf legend never died, because it speaks of a truth that no science can erase. The truth that we are, and always have been, divided creatures. Humans during the day, beasts during the night, and the moon only reveals what was always there. In the next chapter of Lost Legends, we will dive into the science behind the monster, where we will explore how modern medicine finally explained what 4 centuries was considered impossible. Prepare to discover the documented cases of real cannibalism, the transforming ointments, and the dark psychology of human cruelty, because sometimes what seems like legend is just a part of the story that has not yet been told.